So imagine a country that is just um, deeply integrated with the natural world, like so incredibly green that its carbon footprint is practically microscopic.
Right, like an environmental saint, basically.
Exactly. I mean, we are talking about an nation that emits just zero point zero 0.06 tons of CO2 per person annually.
Which is incredibly low. I mean, just to give you some context on that, the global average sits at around 4.54 tons.
Wow. Okay, so 4.54 versus zero point zero 0.06.
Yeah, and the typical developed nation is often, double or triple that global average.
That's just wild. So imagine this same country is so ecologically restrained that when you take their Human Development Index, their HDI, and you mathematically adjust it for planetary pressures, which is this metric called the PHDI, their global ranking doesn't fall.
Right, which it usually does for most countries.
Right. It actually rises above its baseline. So on paper, if you're just like glancing at the ecological metrics, you are looking at an absolute eco-utopia.
You really are. It looks perfect.
But then, you turn the page of the report we're digging into today, and that perfect green facade just, it shatters completely.
It really does shatter. And it shatters because you are basically forced to look at the human cost of that pristine environmental record.
Right.
Like when you look at the 2023 Human Development Index, this apparent ecological paradise ranks 160th out of 203 countries globally.
Man, 160th.
Yeah, it holds a score of just 0.576.
That is exactly why you and I are here today. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to really explore the deep game of resource endowment and human development inside Papua New Guinea, or PNG.
Right, because there's a massive contradiction here.
A completely mind-bending contradiction in the data. We need to figure out why a nation that treads so incredibly lightly on the earth struggles so heavily to, just provide for the most basic survival needs of its own citizens.
Yeah, and to really set the baseline for this conversation for you listening, I want you to visualize the first page of this report.
Oh yeah, this visual is striking.
It really is. Picture this stark, minimalist, white page. Okay. On the left side, there is a tiny, almost invisible sliver of a line. And that represents their microscopic CO2 footprint, that 0.06 tons we mentioned.
It's your total spec.
Exactly. It's barely a speck. But then on the right side of the page, there is another bar. And this bar is, well, it's equally tiny. It's equally suppressed.
And what's that one?
That bar represents the average PNG citizen's actual years of schooling. It is a mere 4.96 years.
Wow. Less than 5 years of formal education for the average adult.
Yeah.
So basically, you have a 4th or 5th grade education level dictating the entire human capital of a nation.
That is the reality on the ground. And when you place those two tiny bars side by side, that whole illusion of the eco-utopia just completely evaporates.
Right, because it reframes the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You begin to realize they aren't treading lightly because they've engineered some brilliant, sustainable, post-carbon green economy.
Yeah, they aren't choosing to be green.
No, they are treading lightly because the infrastructure of human development, the schools, the hospitals, the paved roads, the power grids, it simply hasn't been built to scale.
So they are green by omission, not by commission.
Exactly, green by omission.
That distinction right there is the crux of this entire report.
Yeah.
It really forces us to ask, how did Papua New Guinea arrive at this 0.576 score?
Yeah.
Because when we see a number that low, ranked 160th in the world, I think the immediate assumption is just total stagnation.
Sure, yeah. You assume nothing is happening.
Right. Has it always been this dire? Or is there a hidden story of progress buried in all this historical data?
Well, the data actually does reveal a story of progress, but it's what we might call a 30-year slow crawl.
Okay, a slow crawl.
Yeah. If we pull back and look at the macro picture, the whole trajectory over the last 3 decades, PNG's HDI back in 1990 was a pretty dismal 0.403. But by 2023, it did climb to 0.576.
Okay, let me just run the math on that real quick. From 0.403 to 0.576, that is roughly a 43% increase in their core human development metric over 33 years.
Exactly.
I mean, on paper, if you told a state planner that their primary well-being index went up 43%, they'd be throwing a parade, right? That sounds like a monumental victory for a developing nation.
It is a victory, and I want to be clear, we really shouldn't dismiss the sheer governmental and societal effort it takes to move a national needle by 43%.
Right, that's not nothing.
It's definitely not nothing. That percentage isn't just an abstract number. It represents real physical clinics being built in remote valleys. It's new roads connecting villages that were previously just completely cut off.
Real lives being saved.
Real life saved and improved, exactly. But There's a very sobering reality check attached to this because human development does not happen in a vacuum. It is a relative race.
Because the rest of the world isn't just, standing still waiting for P&G to catch up.
Far from it. While P&G climbed that 43%, the rest of the world was basically in a full sprint. So despite 3 decades of relentless effort, P&G's 0.576 is still massively trailing the 2023 global average.
And what's that global average sitting at right now?
It's currently at 0.756.
Wow. Okay, so they are chasing a moving target.
A very fast-moving target. And the gap between P&G and the rest of the world, this development deficit, it's stubbornly persisting. In fact, it's even widening in some localized metrics.
So if they are putting in the work and they're seeing a 43% return on that work, why are they still so far behind? Like, what is mechanically holding them down at this specific bottleneck?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of development economics, what the data is really showing us is a classic bottleneck scenario.
Okay, break that down for me.
So countries generally move through phases of development, right? P&G has actually successfully dragged itself out of the absolute bottom tier. They've transitioned away from the lowest, most desperate levels of human development.
Right.
But now they are trapped. They're trapped in this brutal, sticky transition phase between low and medium human development.
So they hit a wall.
Exactly. The relatively easy gains, and I use easy in heavy quotes here, like basic vaccinations or, establishing a baseline primary school,
Yeah.
those have been made. Now they are hitting a structural ceiling.
Okay, I want to visualize this structural ceiling for a second. It's almost like playing a video game where leveling up from level 1 to 10 just requires grinding,
Right,
You
yeah.
put in the hours, you do the basic tasks, and eventually, inevitably, you level up. But breaking past level 10 requires entirely new mechanics. You need special gear, you need complex team strategies.
A great way to put it.
So P&G has done the grinding. They put in the 33 years of base level work to get out of the bottom tier. But now they're facing this boss door, and things like systemic inequality and geographic isolation are blocking the path. The old strategy of just, hey, let's build a few more basic clinics isn't going to open that door.
That analogy really captures the essence of it, but I'd argue the mechanics are even more insidious than, a static boss door. Well, a door implies a single, monolithic obstacle that you just need the right key for, right? The data suggests it's much more like a localized short circuit in a national power grid.
Oh, interesting. Explain that. How does a short circuit map to this data?
Okay, so imagine a country generating a decent amount of economic energy, say from natural resource extraction, which P&G actually has quite a bit of.
Right. Lots of mining and forestry there.
Exactly. Now, in a healthy system, that economic energy flows through the grid. It lights up every neighborhood, it funds schools in the highlands, it builds hospitals in the capital.
It distributes.
It distributes. But in P&G, massive structural inequalities and gender divides act as short circuits. So the energy is generated, yes, but it gets trapped in one specific node.
Like just staying within the capital city.
Exactly. Perhaps a small urban elite in Port Moresby or a very specific demographic, while the rest of the country is just left in the dark. The grid can't power up to the next level because the distribution infrastructure is fundamentally broken.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, so grinding out basic survival is one thing, but engineering an equitable, fully connected society is an entirely different discipline.
That makes total sense.
Mm.
So to really understand why they're trapped at this bottleneck, we basically have to stop looking at this massive aggregate number.
We do.
Because a score of 0.576 kind of blurs out the reality on the ground. We need to look directly at the individual human lifespans and the actual classrooms that, make up the math.
Absolutely. And the most glaring place to start that micro-level look is the health data. The report isolates a metric here that highlights a really profound tragedy. I actually call it the stolen 7 years.
Stolen 7 years. Okay, lay the numbers on us.
So in 2023, the life expectancy at birth for someone born in Papua New Guinea is 66.1 years.
66.1. And the global average life expectancy right now is 73.4 years.
Yes. Which means, simply by the geographic lottery of being born in PNG, a citizen is statistically robbed of over 7 years of life compared to the average human on this planet.
7 years. I mean, if you really stop and think about what happens in 7 years, that's, watching your grandchild grow up. That's an entire secondary education. That's a whole chapter of a life.
It's a massive amount of time.
And you mentioned earlier that their historical progress was a slow crawl. How much has that life expectancy actually improved since 1990?
Very little, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
Back in 1990, the life expectancy was 59.7 years.
Okay.
So in over 30 years of massive medical advancements globally, PNG has only managed to add about 6.3 years to a citizen's life.
That it's heartbreaking.
It is, but it's not just the sluggish growth that stands out in the data here. It's the intense fragility of the healthcare system providing those years in the first place.
What do you mean by fragility?
Well, the data clearly shows what happens when that system is stressed.
Right.
Like during the 2021 global pandemic, PNG's life expectancy suffered a severe synchronous dip alongside the rest of the world. It dropped down to around 64.3 years before it started slightly rebounding.
Wait, I want to push back on that slightly, though, because the whole world took a hit during COVID-19, right?
True.
Even highly developed nations saw their life expectancy drop. So why is PNG's dip specifically indicative of, like, a fragile system?
It's a completely fair question. The difference really lies in the concept of systemic shock absorbers.
Okay.
Highly developed nations took a hit, yes, but they had vast ICUs, right? They had rapid vaccine deployment infrastructure. They had the ability to pivot to telemedicine almost overnight.
Right, they had safety net.
Exactly, they
Yeah.
had a buffer. PNG's system just lacks that padding entirely. Much of their healthcare is deeply reliant on understaffed rural clinics.
So when a global shock hits,
There is no secondary line of defense. The population just takes the hit directly. And because the baseline is already so low, I mean, we're starting at 66 years, any drop pushes a significant portion of the population back toward life expectancies that we honestly haven't seen in the developed world since the mid-20th century.
wow. Okay, so a total lack of infrastructural shock absorbers leads directly to those stolen years. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So that covers the health side of the HDI equation. But let's move to the knowledge side, because the education data reveals something the report essentially frames as the missing decade.
Right.
And I gotta say, this is the part of the data that really stopped me in my tracks. We mentioned it at the very beginning of the deep dive. The average actual schooling for an adult in PNG is 4.96 years.
Less than 5 years.
Less than 5 years. And the world average is around 8.7 years. So they are functioning on less than half the educational foundation of the rest of the globe.
And the real tragedy of that 4.96 number is really exposed when you look at the discrepancy between expectation and reality.
What do you mean by expectation?
So the UN tracks this metric called expected years of schooling. This basically calculates how many years a child entering the school system today is theoretically expected to complete based on current enrollment rates across all levels.
Okay, so it's a projection.
Right. And for youth in PNG, that expectation is actually surprisingly high.
Yeah.
It's 11.5 years.
Hold on. You are saying the system is currently designed, theoretically, to keep a child in a classroom for 11.5 years.
Yes.
But the actual adult reality is 4.96.
Exactly.
That is not just a gap. That is a massive canyon. Where on earth are all those years going?
The data visualizes this as a massive funnel effect.
Okay, picture a funnel.
Right. You have this incredibly wide mouth of expectation at the top. You've got young children enrolling in primary school full of potential, aiming for those 11.5 years. But as they move through the system, systemic pressures just squeeze that wide funnel down to an absolute trickle of reality at the bottom.
Okay, let's explore those systemic pressures, because
Okay.
I can imagine there's like a massive leaky pipe in their educational infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
The water entering the system looks great at the source, but there are huge cracks in the pipe all along the way. But what exactly are the cracks in PNG? Is it just like a lack of money to pay teachers?
It's far more complex than just funding. To really understand the leaks in this pipe, we have to look at the unique geographical and cultural realities of Papua New Guinea. I mean, this is a country with over 800 distinct languages.
800.
Over 800. And it features some of the most rugged, mountainous highland terrain on Earth, with many, many villages entirely inaccessible by road.
Ah, so the geography itself is breaking the pipe.
Exactly. Imagine you are a child in a remote highland village. You might attend a local primary school where the teacher speaks your specific local dialect.
Okay, makes sense.
You complete 4 years there. But to go to secondary school, you have to literally walk 2 days across a mountain range to a regional center.
Oh my God. 2 days.
And when you finally get there, the instruction is entirely in TikTok, Paisan, or English, which you maybe barely speak.
So the dropout rate isn't necessarily a choice. It's a physical and linguistic inevitability for a massive portion of the population.
Yes, exactly. And then you add to that the severe economic pressures. Families in multidimensional poverty often have to pull children, and especially girls, which we'll get into, out of school to help with subsistence agriculture or domestic labor.
Right, because survival trumps education in those scenarios.
Precisely. Furthermore, there is just a historical lack of secondary and tertiary facilities built in the first place. So thousands of kids enter the wide mouth of the funnel, but through geographic isolation, language barriers, and economic necessity, almost nothing reaches the faucet. The adults emerge with only 4.96 years.
Man, that paints an incredibly vivid, if deeply depressing picture. But here's the thing about everything we've discussed so far. The 4.96 years of school, the 66.1 years of life, the .576 overall score.
Yeah.
These are all averages.
Right. And averages can be deceiving.
Averages are notorious for lying to us. They smooth out the extremes. Like, if you and I are in a room and I have 10 apples and you have 0 apples, on average we have 5 apples each. Thela looks totally fine, but you are still starving. So to understand the real ground-level experience in PNG, we have to look at what happens when you apply the inequality tax.
Yes. That is the crucial pivot in our analysis here. You simply cannot judge a developing nation purely by its arithmetic mean. The United Nations recognizes this, which is why they measure this inequality tax through a very specific metric called the Inequality-Adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
Okay, break down how the IHDI actually works mechanically. Because it sounds a bit abstract, but it clearly has a very real impact on the score.
It does. It works mathematically by penalizing skewed distributions.
Okay.
So it takes that baseline human development score we've been talking about, the .576, and it discounts it based on how unevenly health, education, and income are spread across the population.
So if everyone has the same, there's no tax.
Exactly. If a country has a perfectly equal distribution of these things, the IHDI equals the HDI. But the more unequal the society, the heavier the tax, and the lower the IHDI drops.
And so what happened to PNG?
When you apply this calculation to PNG, their score plummets from .576 to a devastating .423.
Oh, wow. It just completely falls off a cliff.
It really does. And the loss rate is the vital figure we need to examine here. PNG loses 26.56% of its total human development potential simply because of inequality.
26%. And how does that compare globally?
To give you some context on how severe that is, the global average loss to inequality is around 21.96%. So PNG is paying a significantly higher inequality tax than the rest of the world.
And what exactly is being taxed here? When we look under the hood of that 26.56% drop, where are they losing those specific points?
The breakdown in the report is honestly staggering. Inequality in education alone wipes out 32.1% of their progress.
Wait, 32.1%. So nearly a third of their educational value just vanishes simply because of how it is distributed.
Yes, and imagine what that looks like in physical reality.
Right.
It means a small urban elite in the capital, Port Moresby, might be getting a world-class international standard education, eventually heading off to universities in Australia or Asia.
Getting those 15, 16 years of schooling.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the vast rural majority barely manages to get those 4 or 5 years of primary school we talked about. The mathematical average says 4.96, but the reality is a bimodal extreme. It's the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
And then you look at health. Inequality in health erases another 20.2% of their index.
Which means that life expectancy of 66.1 we talked about earlier isn't really true for everyone either.
Not at all.
It might be like 75 for the wealthy who have access to private clinics, and then maybe 55 or even lower in a remote village where preventable diseases just run rampant.
Precisely. The inequality tax reveals that the average PNG citizen doesn't really exist. You either have access to the grid or you don't. And sadly, most people don't.
Man. And here's where the data gets deeply, deeply physical. The report doesn't just stop at the IHDI. It drills down even further into this metric from 2016 to 2018 called the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI.
Yes, the MPI is crucial here.
And I really love this metric because it looks at poverty not just as, a lack of money in a bank account, but as a literal lack of basic human necessities. And according to this MPI data, 56.6% of the population in Papua New Guinea lives in multidimensional poverty.
Over half the country.
Over half the country.
And while 56.6% is a massive headcount, it is the intensity of that poverty that we really need to focus on in this report. The MPI measures an intensity figure, which for PNG sits at 46.5%. 56.5%.
Okay, stop there for a second. Explain what intensity means in this context. If 56% of people are in poverty, what does a 46.5% intensity tell us about their actual daily lives?
It tells us about the overlapping nature of their deprivation. It means that those 56.6% of people aren't just missing one specific thing.
Like they aren't just missing a car.
Right. They aren't just lacking a bit of disposable income. They are simultaneously deprived of nearly half, 46.5% of all the basic life necessities measured by the index. They are experiencing compound poverty.
Half of everything you need to live a functional modern life just gone. What does that actually look like on the ground? Give me the physical reality of compound poverty.
The data provides a really brilliant pie chart of these overlapping deprivations. School attendance is a massive anchor. It contributes 17.7% to their overall poverty score.
Right, which ties right back into our leaky pipe analogy from earlier.
Exactly. But then you look at living standards and you see the physical daily grind of that poverty. A lack of cooking fuel contributes 11.9% to their poverty index. A lack of electricity is 11.7%. Substandard housing is 11.1%.
Okay, let's pause on that one specific detail you just mentioned.
Yeah.
A lack of cooking fuel.
Yeah.
Because to you or I, or really anyone listening in a developed nation, that might sound like, oh, they can't afford propane, so they have to cook outside on a grill.
Right.
But that's not what it means here, is it?
Not at all. In this context, a lack of clean cooking fuel means they are burning solid biomass.
Like wood.
Wood, crop waste, or even animal dung. And they are often burning it inside poorly ventilated, rudimentary housing.
Which leads directly to severe indoor air pollution.
Yeah.
I mean, people are inhaling thick smoke every single day just to boil water or cook a meal.
Exactly. And that leads directly to chronic respiratory diseases, which, if you think about it, loops right back to the health data we discussed earlier.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It contributes to those stolen 7 years of life expectancy.
Precisely. And it loops into the education data, too. Because a child suffering from asthma caused by indoor smoke is going to miss more days of school.
It's all connected.
It is. Furthermore, if you lack electricity, which we noted contributes 11.7% to their poverty, you can't study at night. You can't read after the sun goes down.
It is a vicious, interlocking cycle. You can't separate the lack of electricity from the lack of education, or the lack of clean fuel from the low life expectancy. Poverty is multidimensional because the deprivations mutually reinforce each other. You literally cannot solve one without addressing the others.
That is exactly the defining characteristic of the bottleneck they are trapped in.
Oh.
But believe it or not, we haven't even touched the deepest fault line yet.
Wait, there's more.
Oh, yes, because when you look at who bears the absolute brunt of that 46.5% intensity of poverty, you find the most dangerous structural flaw in PNG society. You cannot understand this country, and you absolutely cannot understand why they are stuck without looking directly at the gender divide.
The gender divide.
It is the silent crisis, leaving half the population completely behind.
Okay, let's dive into the gender data because the numbers in this report are, frankly, alarming. Let's start with the Gender Development Index, the GDI. How does this differ from the normal HDI we've been talking about?
So the GDI takes the exact same parameters as the HDI health, knowledge, and living standards, but it measures the gap between female and male achievement.
Okay, so it compares the two.
Right. It gives us a ratio. PNG sits at a GDI of 0.926, which places them in Group 3. That is the UN's category for countries with medium to low equality in human development.
Let's put the raw numbers to that ratio just so we can see the gap.
Okay. The male HDI in PNG is 0.599.
Which is
Yeah.
almost 0.6
Right. That is right on the cusp, practically touching the medium human development tier. But the female HDI is trailing far behind at 0.554.
So basically, if you are a man in PNG,
Yeah.
you are essentially experiencing a significantly more developed country than if you are a woman.
In terms of statistics, yes, absolutely.
But as concerning as that GDI is, it's another metric, the Gender Inequality Index, or the GII, that really just jumps off the page and sets off all the alarm bells.
Yes. While the DDI measures absolute development capabilities, the GII measures the loss of potential due to inequality in 3 specific areas: reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
And PNG's performance here is, well, it's catastrophic.
It is.
Let's talk about the history of their GII because the timeline is just bizarre. In 2017, this index experienced a dramatic, violent spike. It shot up to around 0.720, indicating massive, widespread gender inequality. And while it did settle slightly down to 0.754 by 2023, they currently rank 166th out of 166 countries measured globally.
Yeah.
They are literally dead last in the world for gender inequality.
And that 2017 spike you mentioned is what analysts call a statistical anomaly that demands an explanation.
Because things don't usually change that fast.
Exactly. National demographics and deep-seated social norms usually change at a glacial pace. They take generations to shift. When you see a violent swing in an index like the GII over a single year, it does not just mean they had a bad year. It implies a massive systemic shock.
So what actually happened in 2017? Did society just, like, collapse overnight for women?
Well, usually a spike like this points to one of two things. First, it could be a profound, sudden failure of social policy or a complete breakdown in healthcare access.
Like what?
For instance, if funding for maternal clinics suddenly dried up due to a massive budget crisis, that would cause a spike. But the second, and often more likely reason in developing nations, is a drastic shift in statistical methodology.
You mean they just started measuring things differently?
Exactly. Sometimes a number getting drastically worse actually means data collection is getting better.
Oh, wow, that's a paradox.
Right. They might have finally started accurately counting the rural female populations that were previously just invisible to the state apparatus. They started counting the true rate of maternal mortality or the true lack of female labor participation. The invisible inequality suddenly became visible on the spreadsheet, causing the index to spike.
So the problem was always there. They just finally turned the lights on.
Most likely. But regardless of whether it was a policy failure or a data correction, the reality it exposed is incredibly bleak.
It really is. And when you look at the political and labor landscape detailed in the report, you see exactly why they're ranked 166th. It is what the data calls the silence in parliament.
Yes.
Listen to this statistic because it is wild. From 2017 to 2021, the percentage of female representation in Papua New Guinea's parliament was exactly 0%.
0%.
Not a single woman making laws for a country of millions. And even by 2023, it only crawled up to 2.7%. For context, the world average for female parliamentary representation sits at 26.5%.
Having 0% female representation for 4 solid years is practically a statistical impossibility in a functioning democracy, unless there are profound, deeply entrenched systemic barriers actively keeping women out of the political sphere.
So what are those barriers? Why can't a woman get elected in PNG?
It comes back to the cultural and geographic structure we touched on earlier. Politics in PNG is often deeply tied to local clan affiliations, male-dominated tribal leadership structures, and sometimes very volatile electoral environments.
Okay.
Without robust state mechanisms to ensure female political empowerment, the traditional power dynamics just completely lock women out. And the consequence of that 0% is profound.
How so?
It means that for an entire parliamentary cycle, half the population had literally zero voice in the legislation that governs their bodily autonomy, their educational funding, and their economic future.
Right. If you have no voice in making the laws aren't going to protect you.
Exactly.
And we see the exact same exclusion happening in the economic future of the country. The labor void is just as stark as the political void. Let's look at the workforce data. Currently, female labor force participation is 50.65% compared to 53.27% for men. Now, at first glance, a 3% gap doesn't look like a massive crisis, right?
Right, but the crisis isn't in the current snapshot. The crisis is in the trend line. We have to look backwards to see the catastrophe.
Okay, take us back.
In the year 2000, female labor force participation in PNG was 71.3%.
Wow. Wait, from 71.3% down to 50.65%.
Yes. Over the last 20-plus years, while the rest of the world has generally been integrating women more fully into the formal economy, PNG has suffered a massive hemorrhaging of female labor.
Why? Why are they leaving the workforce at such a staggering rate?
It is often a symptom of an economy formalizing in a way that excludes women. As an economy shifts from informal, local agriculture, where women are highly active, toward more formal, wage-paying jobs in urban centers or resource extraction, women are often left behind.
Because of the education gap we talked about.
Exactly, due to the lower education levels. If the new jobs require secondary education and women are only getting 4.96 years of schooling, they get pushed out of the statistics. Instead of progressing toward a more inclusive, modern economy, PNG is sliding backward. They are losing a massive demographic dividend.
Yeah, you simply cannot pull a nation through a development bottleneck when you are actively benching half of your team.
You really can't.
It is an incredibly grim momentum. We have dead last gender inequality, 0 women in parliament, plummeting labor participation, and compounding multidimensional poverty. But as I was pouring through this data, I found a massive statistical anomaly.
Oh, yes, the bright spot.
A rare bright spot that actually defies everything we've just talked about. It makes absolutely no sense on the surface. Let's talk about maternal mortality.
This is perhaps the most fascinating data point in the entire report.
In 1990, the maternal mortality ratio in PNG was 334.9 deaths per 100,000 live births, a deeply tragic number reflecting a broken health system. But by 2023, according to this report, that number dropped to 191 deaths per 100,000.
And we really need to pause and emphasize how wild this anomaly is compared to the global baseline. The global average for maternal mortality in 2023 is 216.1.
Wait, let me just make sure I'm framing this correctly. You have a country with a dead last rank in gender inequality, a country that had 0 women in parliament for years, a country trapped in the bottom tier of overall human development.
Right.
And yet, Papua New Guinea actually beats the global average when it comes to saving mothers' lives during childbirth. How is that mechanically possible? If there are no women in parliament to pass funding laws for maternal health, how does this happen? It feels like finding, I don't know, a blooming flower in the middle of a paved highway.
It is a stunning paradox, and it proves a fundamental theory about global development. Targeted vertical health interventions can pierce through horizontal systemic poverty.
Okay, break that down for me. What is the difference between vertical and horizontal interventions?
Okay, so a horizontal intervention is trying to fix the whole system, building a nationwide power grid, reforming the entire education curriculum, paving thousands of miles of roads. That is incredibly slow and it's incredibly expensive.
Right.
A vertical intervention, on the other hand, is highly specific and narrowly targeted. It is saying, we are going to focus purely on stopping mothers from dying in childbirth.
So even in a society with massive structural disadvantages for women, you can override the macro-level failures if you deploy the right tactics.
Exactly. This drop from 334 to 191 wasn't magic. It was the result of highly specific, dedicated medical programs. It involves training specialized local midwives who can operate in those remote highland villages without needing a fully staffed hospital.
So taking the care directly to the people.
Yes. It involves improving emergency obstetric care at regional centers. And crucially, it involves targeted foreign aid and NGO intervention that bypasses the sluggish national bureaucracy and delivers resources directly to maternal clinics.
That is a massive aha moment for me. It shows that progress isn't just a byproduct of national wealth. You don't have to wait for your HDI to hit 0.800 to start saving lives. Progress is a choice. It requires targeted will and specific execution.
It really is a beacon of hope in an otherwise very difficult data set. But it also serves as a warning.
Or warning.
Yeah. Vertical interventions are band-aids. They save lives in the moment, which is amazing, but they don't fix the underlying system. A midwife can save a mother during birth, but if that mother still has to go home to a house with no electricity and burn wood for fuel, and she has no voice in her local government, the cycle of poverty just continues.
Right.
The lack of broad infrastructure, the lack of industry, and the shrinking inclusive labor force really force us to look back at the very first thing we mentioned today, the hook of this whole deep dive.
Yes. Papua New Guinea's status as an environmental saint, which brings us right back to the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
This is where we have to synthesize the paradox. Let's look at the mechanics of the PHDI. Globally, when you factor in the damaged countries due to the Earth, the carbon they burn, the forests they clear to build their wealthy, high HDI societies, the global average takes a massive hit.
Because they're penalizing the pollution.
Exactly. The global HDI average plummets by 10%, dropping from 0.756 down to 0.680. The rich world pays a heavy statistical penalty on this index for their pollution.
But PNG, their baseline HDI of 0.576 barely flinches when adjusted for planetary pressures. It only drops a fraction of a point to 0.566. As we noted at the top of the show, their CO2 emissions are a microscopic 0.06 tons per person.
And we see the exact same story in their material footprint. The report shows the average person in PNG consumes just 2.31 tons of material per capita annually.
Wow.
And to give you context, the global average is 12.71 tons. An average citizen of a developed nation consumes nearly 6 times more physical resources than a citizen of PNG.
So this raises the ultimate question of the report. When we look at that tiny ecological footprint, the low carbon, the minimal material consumption, and we stand it right next to the massive deprivations in education, the overlapping multidimensional poverty, and the worst gender inequality in the world. Are we looking at a triumph of sustainable living? Or are we looking at the tragic footprint of extreme infrastructure starvation?
The data strongly, almost overwhelmingly, suggests the latter. You do not have a high material footprint if you do not have electricity grids covering the nation. You do not emit high levels of CO2 if you lack paved highway networks for millions of cars.
Right.
You don't consume resources if you lack industrial manufacturing jobs. The environmental data looks good simply because the developmental data is so poor.
Yeah. It is remarkably easy to have a zero-carbon footprint if you don't have a power plant to plug a hospital into. The greenness of Papua New Guinea is a side effect of poverty, not a crowning policy achievement of sustainability. They aren't a post-carbon society, they're largely a pre-industrial one.
Exactly. But, and this is where we have to synthesize everything we've learned and look to the future, this unique, if accidental, position does offer a remarkable roadmap. If we look at how PNG escapes this bottleneck between low and medium development, the data gives us three very clear, actionable directives.
Okay, let's lay out the roadmap. Based on all this data, what is step one?
Step one has to be breaking the gender shackles. The data is unequivocal on this. You simply cannot grow a modern, resilient economy if you silence half your parliament and actively push women out of the workforce.
Right, it's just math at that point.
Exactly. Moving away from 166th rank in gender inequality is the lowest hanging fruit for massive economic and social gains. If you bring female labor participation back up to where it was in 2000, you instantly boost the economic engine of the country.
And step two has to be fixing that education funnel. You have to stop the pipeline leak. You have a youth population with a theoretical expectation of 11.5 years of schooling, but a geographic and economic system that only delivers 4.96 years to adults.
It's a huge waste of potential.
Yeah, if you can bridge that gap, if you can build local secondary schools, offer instruction in local dialects before transitioning to national languages, and alleviate the poverty that forces kids out of the classroom, you instantly elevate the human capital of the entire nation.
Which brings us to step three, which is where the green illusion actually becomes a massive, tangible asset. We can call it the green advantage. Because PNG has been historically starved of heavy 20th century infrastructure, they possess something very rare, a blank ecological slate.
Explain the advantage of a blank slate. Why is it good that they haven't built anything yet?
Because they don't carry the sunk costs of the developed world. Think about Western nations right now. They are spending billions, if not trillions of dollars, trying to tear down dirty, entrenched coal grids and rip up fossil fuel infrastructure to build green alternatives.
Oh, it's a great point.
PNG doesn't have to tear anything down. They can build green from scratch. They can deploy decentralized solar microgrids to those isolated highland villages. Instead of trying to run a massive centralized power line over a mountain range, they can leapfrog the dirty, polluting industrial phase of human development entirely. They have the opportunity to turn their current PHDI dividend, that high ranking on the Planetary Pressure Index, into real, sustainable, clean human growth.
Man, so what does this all mean for you listening? We so often view development as a straight, inevitable line. We assume that poor countries must follow the exact same heavily polluting, carbon-burning, resource-extracting path that rich countries took a century ago to get wealthy.
Right. We assume that's the only way.
We assume you have to destroy your environment to educate your kids. But looking at Papua New Guinea's blank ecological slate standing right next to its deep historical social wounds, you really have to wonder, could a country like PNG entirely skip the industrial pollution phase of history? Could they leapfrog straight into a localized, post-carbon economy? If only they could solve the crushing inequality within their own borders. It forces us to redefine what we're even looking at when we measure success. Is true poverty the lack of factories and highways? Or is it the lack of equality, the lack of voice, and the lack of a classroom for a child in the highlands?
That is the big question.
It brings us right back to that minimalist graphic you had us picture at the very start of our conversation. The tiny carbon footprint on the left, and the tiny years of schooling on the right. The challenge for Papua New Guinea in the 21st century isn't to shrink the left bar anymore. It is to radically, aggressively grow the right one without destroying the balance.
Well said.
And that is your deep dive into the complex, contradictory, and deeply human data of Papua New Guinea. Your custom look into the numbers is complete. We hope it gives you a totally new lens to look at what human development really means in the modern world. Keep questioning the averages, and we'll see you next time.